from other market dynamics will be difficult. Secondly, over the last 5 years, there have been numerous policy studies around the world into a range of digital economy issues as governments and authorities have invested in building knowledge and intellectual capacity in digital market trends. And there are clear recurring themes in this impressive body of work, both as to what's happening in digital markets and what it means for the policy and law in this area. I'd say that these themes are something of an emergent consensus. And here are my key takeouts in relation to that consensus. First, digital markets are different in key respects to offline or traditional markets. Many are multi-sided, involve platform business models, and so exhibit economies of both scale and scope as well as strong network effects. Data accumulation, analysis, and use are crucial, which may mean zero monetary prices for consumers, but also create feedback loops that amplify the network effects. Interconnectedness in and across markets is common, featuring horizontal and vertical integration. And competition may be a click away in theory, but in practice, consumer biases and inertia mean often it's just not taken advantage of. Lastly, of course, geographic boundaries and dependencies are often immaterial. Now, that view that online markets are different is not all that controversial. It's the implications of those differences that are another matter. But my second takeout is that at least as far as the policy work done to date is concerned, there is growing support for the view that markets with these combined features are prone to tipping, a cycle leading to a dominant firm at high concentration. And in the process, the competitive process shifts from competition in the market to competition for the market. And once tipped, of course, a potential rival for the market can only overcome the incumbency advantage through significant innovation. Moreover, once a market has been won, the winner may have strong incentives and abilities to impede its challengers. Thirdly, in the face of these dynamics, the categories of risk to consumer welfare and competition are pretty much the standard ones: price, quality, and innovation. Power in online advertising may mean markups paid by advertisers, power that's amplified by non-transparency and vertical integration in ad tech supply chains. Consumers may not pay a monetary price, but we all now know they pay at least with their personal data and certainly with their scarce attention. What does that mean in terms of quality? Well, bearing in mind that these platforms are very much in the business of garnering and keeping our attention, that may involve offering us content that certainly keeps our attention, but may not be of the highest quality. More advertising minutes per content may also be seen to lower quality. And of course, in terms of quality, we cannot overlook the risks of degradation to our privacy. Aside from risks to price and quality, in my view, perhaps most significantly, there is a longer-term risk to innovation. This result is almost intuitive. Firms simply run faster when there are others in the race. What does all this mean for the policy and law in competition? My fourth takeout is that it seems to me the growing mainstream view is that the existing toolkit is largely fit for purpose. We don't need to wipe the slate clean and start all over again. However, authorities do need to be flexible. There may well need to be shifts in emphasis to customize and adapt existing tools to new and novel business models. Markets may need to be looked at through a wider lens, with greater attention to competitive strategies and relationships across market spaces. We may need to recognize new forms of power, so-called intermediation or bottleneck power. And in the face of zero or even negative monetary prices, assessment of non-price effects such as, of course, quality and innovation may need to come to the fore. Fifth, there are increasing calls for competition authorities to be more courageous in selecting cases, making decisions, and designing remedies. This brings us, of course, to error cost, and the growing view seems to me that we should be more concerned with the potential costs of under-enforcement than the potential risks of over-enforcement. Sixth, the case for less conservatism and greater ingenuity is perhaps particularly pressing in the context of merger control. We all know the Big Four have been on a veritable shopping spree over the last decade, and more to the point, none of these acquisitions have been unconditionally challenged, and many not even reviewed. It's now recognized that the shopping tour by the Big Four may well have snuffed out potential or emergent competitive threats. And this is generating a growing sense that in the case of mergers, authorities need to be more proactive in protecting competitive market structures. This may mean changing notification thresholds. It may mean paying particular attention to the significance of data assets and to the loss of future innovation, and more generally, just being more sensitive to potential competition in the face even of uncertain counterfactuals. Finally, there's growing acceptance of the view that traditional enforcement may well be complemented by pro-competition regulation. While concentrated market structures may be difficult to shift, regulation is seen as a careful but proactive way forward to ensure our markets stay open and playing fields are level. There are significant advantages of an approach that does not put all our eggs in the enforcement basket. Enforcement is not only slow, it necessarily proceeds on a case-by-case basis and cannot go beyond the specific facts and evidence before it. A regulator can look forward rather than just backwards. It can establish rules of the game to constrain future conduct before there's been harm to competition, and rules that will give the certainty and predictability that will create an environment in which investment and innovation can flourish. I just want to round up with some final thoughts, and I sense you haven't been able to see me and I not you, but hopefully you have heard what I have said. In conclusion, as history teaches us, technological advances bring vast benefits, but they also pose challenges and threats. They involve the upheaval of systems, institutions, and even individual lives. But it does pay to remember that all industrial revolutions, including the one in which we are now in, ultimately, they must be driven by individual and collective choices of people. And it should not just be the choices of the engineers and technologists that matter, but even more importantly, the choices of consumers and citizens and the legislators and regulators who represent them. Competition is not a panacea, and it's not designed to deal with many of the challenges presented by the technological tsunami in which we are now engulfed, but as an instrument that's concerned with the structure and the use of economic power, it has a vital role to play in ensuring we reap the benefits and mitigate the risks of the transformative changes taking place in our economies and societies. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to you all.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen, for the contribution. Well received, even we couldn't see you. I think that what you present is a kind of I would almost say an upbeat call for action. So don't let it all to the technologists and the engineers and the developers. And so the consumers and policymakers should act. But you're also optimistic in saying that the existing toolbox for competition policy and so on can be expanded to address the new challenges. So thank you very much. I hope you will be able to maintain online for the rest of the session, but then we go on to the presenter here in Delhi. So I would like to call upon Raja Parakal, Associate Professor of Thomas Jefferson University, to make his contribution.
Let me thank everybody, especially CUTS, for inviting me and for everybody to be here. And I'm honored, and it's actually a good opportunity to be with like-minded folks here. My presentation focuses on dominance and its implications in the digital era. Let me preface by saying that I'm a political economist, and my approach to all of this is from both political and economic angles. And so you will see a strong flavor of all that going into the presentation. And if I do run out of time, I'm going to just skip ahead to my recommendations at the very end, so we still try to stay within the 10-minute mark. The digital era has two aspects to it. One is the technologies and one is the economy. I'm just running through all of this. I know this room does not need a lot of the basics, but just for the sake of clarity. So for all intents and purposes, these the digital revolution started in the 1990s, and we are very aware of what these technologies involve: PC, of course, the internet, and cell phones and smartphones. The digital economy is variously known as the internet economy or the online economy. There is no settled definition, but I'm just throwing two out there. One is both by IMF. One is a very broad definition, which talks about all kinds of incorporation of data and the internet into our regular traditional aspects of business and finance. The more narrow definition is what I think we are mostly involved with in the field of antitrust, which is online platforms and their activities that owe their existence to such platforms. So, but for my presentation and actually for the paper that led to this presentation, both the definitions apply. The digital economy, let me just start by saying one of the first challenges is that there is no clear definition. And not having a clear definition has actually led to a problem of measurement. So, but however, even if you don't have a measurement of the exact size of the economy, we do have a sense of the enormity of how big it is. For example, we're having this conference on the digital world, where we are having people who came from all parts of the world. So if it is not enormous and of consequence, we wouldn't be having this. So I'm just making a very endogenous kind of a comment there. But exactly how big is big tech? And for that, I just have a couple of interesting slides. This is what has happened since I started speaking. 60 seconds. And this is all that's happened in 60 seconds around the world. And this was just 2 years ago. And I'm pretty sure it's even more than all this. So more than almost 2 million songs have been streamed in the 60 seconds that we spent here. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at the enormous growth of these tech companies is just what's happened in the 17 years since 2000. We have the traditional companies fall out, and the top 5 are all tech companies, as you can see in the slide there. But nothing is more emphatic than what we are seeing now on the screen, with the revenues going up from just almost $40 billion in 2002 to a size of $650 billion in 17. And my math tells me that's a massive increase. So even if we can't measure the economy, we get a sense of how big at least the big tech is. And the key thing for antitrust and dominance is, what is big tech doing with all this money? For one, they are spending millions of dollars in building vast data pools, and this is important, as we'll see as we go forward in the presentation. And as many of us know here, Facebook and Google and others have been buying up all the smaller tech companies, as you can see on the screen. But for me, it's the next one that really shook me when I saw this information. Since 2010, Google has been acquiring, on average, 1 company a week. This is startling, and we can discuss all this later, but I just want to put out some information out there. What are the implications? Like I said, that's the focus, and there are implications for antitrust. There are both positive and normative implications, how to respond, and if at all antitrust should respond. The other implication is for politics and economics, especially for democracy. And also there's another way of looking at it in terms of developing countries, and we're talking about India in this particular context. So like I said, I'm just going to go quickly through certain things that I feel the audience would already be aware of. So when it comes to digital dominance, there are two tools. One is big data, and it's already been called as the new oil, although I don't really agree with that comparison. I think there's some issues there, but still there is some amount of talk going on in comparing the two. What the big data does, it leads to data dominance, and it leads to a lot of market power and market dominance. Something that remained only in textbooks, first-degree price discrimination, has actually become quite practical with big data. So that's one item. The second aspect of digital dominance is two-sided markets and network effects. For the sake of time, and I know it's too technical, but we understand what these two things mean. But what we need to more understand is that these two aspects, two-sided markets and network effects, lead to tremendous market power and market dominance. And we can discuss that as we go forward in the panel. The combined effects of data dominance and network effects is massive barriers to entry and fewer competitors and less competition. And there's already evidence in the non-tech sector of the US at least that 75% of the US industries have seen a massive increase in concentration. So there is some evidence growing up there. The second aspect, when we look at the non-economic side, the democracies, the politics of it, I'm not going to go over all four, so we're just looking at the democracy side. What has happened is that big tech has become the gatekeepers of our news media. I will show through an example, just one example. Big tech can subvert the electoral process. We saw that in Brexit. We saw that in the US in the 2016 presidential election. Big tech can actually, at a personal level, manipulate our news searches. And big tech has monopoly power that translates to unchecked political influence. Let me illustrate by this one particular example. This is taken from Epstein 2018. If you Google, I just used Google as a generic term. If you search using the three, Google, Bing, and Yahoo, you will see a pattern here where Bing and Yahoo have the exact same, kind of very similar ones, which reflect reality. So this is from 2016 elections. If you typed in crooked, it immediately gave you suggestions of, I'm sorry for saying it like this, crooked Hillary. But that was the reality out there where this phrase was so rampantly used. But if you put it in Google, it doesn't say that. It says crooked smile, crooked colors, whatever. My point in saying is that if you could have ignored Google when it was not connected to reality, but we can't because 90% of all searches take place on Google. So there's one more example, which is again taken from Epstein. This is with Hillary Clinton. So I did my own search just 2 months ago when the impeachment of Trump became quite an important activity. So I just went to Bing and Yahoo and did this on my own. This was done on October 2nd. And if I put in the word impeach in Bing and I put impeach in Yahoo, I get impeach Trump as at least one of the options. But wait till you see what you get when you put this in. And so this Yahoo and Bing reflected reality. When I put the same thing in Google, what I find is nothing to do with impeach Trump. Again, we could have ignored Google, but Google has such a dominance of the search market that what they do affect us. And why are they doing this? They don't want you to complete your search. They want to control your search because that is what gets them, that's what gets them their corporate policies and more control. My point in saying it all that is, before I get to India, is that there is a problem with dominance and it is being abused. With India, we have almost half of the population is online now. There's an increasing digital penetration. The big players are Flipkart, owned by Walmart, Amazon, Snapdeal, and we are the Indian economy here right now is growing in terms of the digital economy, and it's going to touch $1 trillion by 2025. I'm just going to jump ahead to something that I wanted to share with all of you. I'm having a bit of a problem here. One of the things that I found from looking at all the cases that CCI has handled with big tech is that CCI, as we heard yesterday from Ms. Sankita Verma, is that they are sticking to the efficiency argument, and they don't want to intervene in nascent markets because there are innovations taking place. But I'm going to jump ahead to the two challenges, sets of challenges we face in the digital era. One is technical challenges, because we are still not sure about what competition really means. And we also need to look at we are still we base our consumer welfare analysis on a price situation. And we also have a challenge of identifying markets, whether they're two-sided or one-sided. The other challenge that we face is the intellectual challenge, which is that we are still in the Bork and Chicago style. Nothing entirely wrong with that, or maybe some, but we can talk about that. This leads to vested interest and a lot of legal and policy inertia. I need 30 seconds and I'm done. Just running to my recommendations, and I think this is something that they asked me to provide some recommendations that will provoke some discussion here. I'm a strong believer that we should still stick with the consumer welfare a way of looking at analysis, but I think we need to redefine the word welfare. And I also believe that we need to be careful with the one-sided or two-sided market identification. And as a political economist, I do think that there has to be some room for political values, for example, democratic outcomes. And I am not an advocate, as some political leaders in the US have been saying quite a bit recently, to break up big tech. I don't think it is a smart strategy for two reasons. One, I don't think it'll solve the problem, and I don't think that if you use that, and if it doesn't solve the problem, you've wasted an opportunity. Leave you with one final thought, and that's my final slide. And I think it's important that we heed what Professor Robert Pitofsky said, that if the free market sector of the economy is allowed to develop under antitrust rules that are blind to all but economic concerns, they likely, and I would add the word, the likely paradoxical result will be an economy so dominated by a few corporate giants that it will be impossible for the state not to play a more intrusive role in economic affairs. So that's my take too. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your highlighting also the big data dominance, and then the consequences of that, not only in the markets but also in the political domain and other issues which we have, allowing us to have a more political assessment of the emergence of the online economy. So with that, I think we have the two presenters have spoken, so let us go to the discussants. So first on the list is Barack Orbach, professor at the University of Arizona. So you have 6 minutes, I think.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I think I greatly enjoyed what I've heard so far. So I'd like to make just 2 comments within 6 minutes. What I have is one, a general comment about the architecture of competition policy and how it can be interpreted in the present phase of technology. And the second is about the significance of the digital divide on competition policy, or more precisely the endogeneity factor of competition policy. Much of what I say is basically a different take of things that Keon and Raju said. I generally agree. I don't have any disagreement with the two of them. So generally speaking, just in terms of competition, I've done considerable work on the consumer welfare standard, and one thing that I can say with a great degree of confidence is that it doesn't have any single meaning, and it is quite a just misleading concept. And the general goal of competition policy is competition. It's not consumer welfare or something like that. The question that we have is, how do we measure competition, or what degree or what type of competitions are beneficial? And for that reason, we actually focus on consumer. One aspect of the present technological phase is that we learn that it's not enough to focus on consumers, but also we must think about upstream markets, specifically labor markets. So this is something that has profoundly changed in the terms of our understanding. So this is one thing. The other aspect is that when we think about what competition policy should be understood, we're talking about economic growth, that its gains are shared by all people, not by a few companies. We all have broad understanding that economic growth is what can increase prosperity. The aspect of that is how is it shared by the entire population. And generally speaking, what we have seen in the US and going forward to other countries is extreme reliance on trickle-down theories. That the notion is that if we create prosperity, over time the wealth will trickle down. Now there is some evidence that in the long run that can happen, so this actually happened in the second industrial revolution, but the notion of happening is taking a few generations. It's way too long in terms of stability of democracies and stabilities of regimes. So that's one aspect that we probably have to think about, how we make sure that the gains of prosperities are shared. So this is a key thing. Now, as far as the platform economics goes, I would say, and Raju touched upon that in a moment, in some slides, the traditional antitrust or competition policy has focused on quantity and prices. It is quite incorrect to say that we had other aspects because they were never measurable. For example, when we talk about innovation or quality, these are not measurable. As applied in the United States and in many other countries, when we talk about competition, we normally focus only on price and quantity. The most significant thing, and I cannot overstate the significance of the present technological phase, is not only price and quantity, but also the consumer choice or preferences, or how the search, or as we call it technically speaking, it's search and matching mechanism. And Raju talked about it a bit. That today, all the platforms have a huge impact on how we choose products, and not only how we choose products, but we actually engage in preference shaping. In the context of the developing economies, they gain a lot because of the fewer restrictions, regulatory restrictions, and different social expectations. They gain here the capacity to manipulate preferences. So for the big platforms, the developing economies are kind of a lab of how to manipulate preferences. And this is probably the most significant thing that we still don't have any access to, and we don't have any capacity, and specifically regulatory agencies do not have the capacity to deal with big data or machine learning, and this is something that we should acquire. So this is the first point. The second point is that in most countries we see considerable political polarization or social polarization. In the overwhelming majorities of these countries, which is the majority of the countries, the political polarization closely follows the digital divide. And this is a common theme that happened in the prior industrial revolution, and that should be a source of concern, because what we have seen is that the digital divide or technological divide in prior contexts means the degree of integration in the new economy. And what we have seen, because of the time it takes to be integrated in the economy, the leading parties that are able to take control over in democratic processes, are parties that their base is in a disfavored position, and that creates a significant negative effect on policy making. So when I think about CUTS in an organization like that, I think that the two major focus, one of the key focus that they have to think about or can think about is how to bridge the digital divide, how to narrow the digital divide, because if we want to have good policies, we have to factor the distortions, and the biggest distortion by order of magnitude is the digital divide, because there is a lot of political capital in mobilizing the divide. And these were my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for staying exactly in time. So that's very good. I think what you highlighted is, how does it ripple on the growth, and how does it reach out? And traditionally we see 1-2 generations before it reaches out. And that resonates, of course, very well, speaking on the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals, which have always said, reach out to the furthest left behind first. So how can we actually do this more inclusive growth, so that we deal with the poorest people now first, to bring them, to lift them out of poverty. And I think you also spoke then on the preference shaping, which is happening through the online platforms, which is also of concern, but which others have been perhaps also say is the mass customization now more happening. But I don't want to become another discussant, so I just go to my left, Jonathan Wong, Chief of Technology and Innovation at UNESCAP.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Great. So Barak set the precedent of staying on time for discussants, so I can't promise to be succinct, but I do speak very quickly, so bear with me. I'm quite intimidated by you all to start with. I'm not from a competition background. My role is really to advise governments on technology policy, so bear with me if I say things that aren't quite correct. Let me start with the session about the fears. Now my biggest fear in this whole agenda, and this fascination with the online economy, is something His Excellency Mr. Panda said yesterday. He said the digital economy is, what, 1/5 of the economy? So the fourth is still traditional. And something Karen said as well is that actually none of this is very new. You know, history, throughout the industrial revolutions, these issues have come up all the time. Is the fact that when we talk about things in the online economy, in the digital economy, such as workers' rights with Uber, stability of work, these sorts of things. These things are still prevalent in the traditional economy. But there's this fascination within academics and policymakers in particular to look at the new shiny problem and try and solve that, when actually some of these fundamental problems in the traditional economy are still there. So let's not lose sight of that. And my fear is that we, again, fetishize and try and address these online issues when actually traditional economies still have many similar issues. Another point to emphasize that, I mean, Raj, you mentioned this whole concept of misinformation in the online media space. I mean, this is still prevalent in the traditional media as well. And again, with half the population still not online and half online, again, let's not forget these traditional problems that still exist. In terms of the policy response, I mean, Karen said something interesting. Are large tech companies, is it a competition problem? And it's interesting. I look at this when I'm advising governments on technology policy in two ways. And my starting point is always this: if all these, the Mark Zuckerbergs of this world, the Bezoses, the late Steve Jobs, etc., were responsible technology leaders, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So for me, is this a conversation about how governments legislate for more responsible business practice? And you look around, particularly Asia, around some very innovative solutions around this. And you touched on this point in inclusivity. In the Philippines, they have an inclusive business accreditation scheme. Now, what this means is if you're a tech company or a standard company, that can prove that your products and services are positively benefiting the very poorest people in your community, you get a 5 to 10 year tax break, straight up. Now, this is what I mean. How do you encourage these technology companies and these future generation of leaders to actually act responsibly? If you crack that, we're not having this conversation. Another example in Thailand, we have the Social Enterprise Act, and now a social enterprise is a company that has not profit maximization as the be-all and end-all, but an ingrained social mission that aims to trade and make money as well. And again, these sorts of policies that give companies specific tax breaks, specific support from the government, again, hopefully in the future will incentivize more responsible technology leaders. And one would hope that the world's next Mark Zuckerberg may have taken an ethics course sometimes in his life. So I think education and creating the next generation of responsible tech leaders should be a real policy focus. Let me touch on regulation as well, and I see this in three ways. I talk about adaptive, innovative, and collaborative regulation. Now, it's interesting, a friend of mine works for the Financial Services Authority in the UK, I'm British, and he said to me, the issue will always be that, and someone mentioned this yesterday, that regulation will lag behind technological development. That is inevitable. He goes, but the big problem within the FSA in the UK is, he goes, our process of making regulation just isn't very quick. So actually, given all these interesting topics on the table, he was trying to figure out actually how do we make that process more quicker, more agile, and more adaptive within regulators. In terms of innovation, I mean, in Singapore, they have the sandbox policy for fintech, which allows companies to, again, not stifle innovation, have fewer regulations to adhere to, which gradually ramp up as the evidence builds up. So I think that's another model. Something people haven't really touched upon as well is actually how technology can make regulation more innovative as well. And certainly within the Bank of England, as an example in the UK, the governor there is actually thinking, how can technology make the process of regulation more innovative and agile as well? Raju, my final point is Raju touched on antitrust, and I think of trust as the key issue here. If we are to develop good regulation for tech companies, how do we do this together? And this all comes down to trust for me. I mean, how do regulators trust that tech firms will disclose all the issues that these technology firms are foreseeing when collaboratively developing the rules of the game around this space? Probably not. Do tech firms trust regulators not to stifle innovation? Probably not. And as the public, I mean, who do we trust to manage our data and our privacy? Is it the government? Is it the tech firms? What are the other options? So fundamentally for me, I think a big question around this space is, from a policy perspective, is these two questions. How do you create the next generation of technology leaders to be responsible? And two, actually, how do you build trust in this space? Once you crack those two things, which are very difficult things, I think we'll make great strides in this online economy as it evolves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, also for staying in time. So let's acknowledge that. And I think you make an interesting point to say that basically let's work on the responsibility and the responsible business conduct of the tech firm. So it's not just innovation driven, but also what's the value being created for markets, but also for society as a whole, and thereby we can regain some of the trust which is maybe currently being eroded. So that's a very valid point. So I move further to my left, Bayal Malik, Advisor Economics and Head Economics Division of the Competition Commission of India.
Thank you very much. I'll just step a little back. So we have had excellent presentations this morning. Coming from the Competition Authority of India, I would like to take this opportunity to restrict my remarks to things which we are facing in this realm of a digital economy, which is undefinable absolutely. And what are the challenges which a competition authority is facing, and is the new paradigm, so to speak, requires a sea change in way the competition authorities think, or the same tools can be applied, but they have to be applied in a more nuanced way than in a kind of a very per se regime which competition authorities find themselves in sometimes. There's a lot of scholarly work, and my comments will therefore be a mix of my observations on this scholarly work, because this impacts the way the officers of the Commission think and advise the Commission. I'll limit my comments to issues which are very pertinent issues. One is regarding the consumer welfare standard and whether or not it is obsolete in the new digital economy when it comes to the education standard in antitrust. Second is my remarks on, and which has been discussed, about the importance of data, and more so regarding how data considerations should be now looked at more carefully when it comes to mergers and acquisitions in digital markets. The third set of comments, which I would be finally concluding my discussant remarks, would be, is antitrust alone enough, or we do need a coherent regulatory architecture and some form of an ex-ante regulation of the kind of the public utility kind, which the minister, which the member of parliament had, former member of parliament had alluded to yesterday. And can it be possible to have certain set of asymmetric regulations when it comes to the gatekeepers of this digital economy and vis-a-vis the startups? So first and most importantly is regarding, and all my comments should also be seen in the construct that digital economy is not a single monolith. We have these online platforms which are non-transaction platforms with their own set of problems and their own set of solutions, and we have transaction platforms in the e-commerce space, for instance, which have their own set of solutions. And I feel that the transaction platforms are more amenable to antitrust rules, and I don't see any problem vis-a-vis the application of antitrust rules to these transaction platforms, and they don't need a different paradigm. However, the non-transaction platforms, that is the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, would require some kind of a more different regulatory architecture, which would be a mix of antitrust as well as data protection. So quickly on consumer welfare. So as we understand, and as was mentioned by one of the discussants here, consumer welfare is a very abused standard because it is not very well understood. It is not just about, and we at the Commission know that when it comes to these markets, not just about low prices and static efficiencies. So then the second retort comes that you cannot measure innovation. That may be true, but their impacts and trends on innovation and the ability to therefore internalize that into our analysis is not that tough, because a consumer welfare standard, simply put, has three basic elements: anti-competitive conduct, which is basically conduct that is not an efficiency based competition on the merits. So what is competition on the merits and what is competition on not on merits is, I think, in my terms, analysis, easily distinguishable, and more so in non-transaction platforms, in transaction platforms. An increase or which, so if it is not a competition on the merits, is the increase or the likely increase in market power on account of efficiency or on account of certain other conducts which does not do not talk about the merits. All right. So one example which came in our implementation of the law is regarding deep discounts in on e-commerce platforms. No one would frown on discounts. Discounts are mechanisms to attract new entry. However, if the same is not reflection of efficiency gains and cost savings, and at the same time it creates distortionary effects on the supply side of the markets, the central question then arises is whether price competition of this form has been, can be seen as competition on the merits. Because consumer getting a lot of cheap products itself is not the way to look at these transactions, because in the long run, if it is hurting one side of the market, that is the seller side of the market, one needs to take that also into consideration. Second issue is regarding the data-driven acquisitions. It is very, very clear now that, and there are studies which have been done to trying to now show that there is kind of a kill zone and there is some kind of an innovation theory of harm. A recent paper by Raghuram Rajan and Luigi Zangailis has started, does not come out with certain policy prescriptions, but has started showing that innovation may be getting harmed in the so-called kill zone. Their study basically shows that high-priced acquisition of entrants by an incumbent do not necessarily stimulate more innovation and entry in an industry where customers face switching costs and network externalities. The prospect of an acquisition by a startup firm by the incumbent platform undermines early adoption by the customers. So the startups coming with new innovative ideas, but customers, when they understand that this firm is going to be bought up, they tend to shy from adopting and experimenting with new technology. And so therefore this reduces the prospective payoffs to these new entrants. This creates a kind of a kill zone in the startup space as described by venture capitalists, where new ventures are not worth funding. So the fact that new ventures are not worth funding, and evidence from these changes is now building up, is in investment in startups by venture capitalists after major acquisitions by Facebook and Google suggest that this is no more than a mere theoretical possibility. So what are we doing at the Commission? We are trying to look at these, at least because empirical studies are most important. You should not go purely on gut feeling. So start to collect data on these acquisitions and to see how are these acquisitions being carried out, what is the motivation, what is the deal size, and the CLRC, that is the Competition Law Review Committee, has, in order to allow more of these acquisitions to be looked, because it is better to nip it in the bud rather than go through the antitrust route, because antitrust route sometimes the tipping has already happened and we do not have a solution. And my final and last point,
Okay.
because the others took their time, I guess I can be, I request the chair to give me a minute, is on antitrust not being panacea to all the problems. The problems, certain problems, especially related to data privacy, and not only privacy as an exploitative conduct by a dominant firm, which I think is a little extension of antitrust instrumentality, which has been taken up by the German authorities, etc., but it is facing problems. But as the fact that huge amounts and troves of data are being collected, whether or not it is on consent, without consent, whether or not it is due to inducing behavioral changes in the consumers, may require certain stronger data protection rules. India is still struggling to have a regulatory architecture which would give the powers of the data back to the consumer, and I think that's the way to go, where there is some kind of a harmonization between other regulation and antitrust. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you also put the spotlight on the new entrants and sort of the killer zone. Personally, I believe it's probably not something unique to the digital economy, because we have seen that also in manufacturing technologies, firms buying out competition. So we just need to look at a new scope, but some of the instruments might be applicable. And then, of course, also pointing to the issues of the data protection architecture, which is still to be developed and put into a firm framework. So with that, I move on to Thomas Cheng, the fourth and last discussant, before we then open for the floor.
Right. Good morning, everyone. The topic of the panel is putting our fears on the table, and I presume the fears refer to what do we do to keep these big tech companies in check. But actually, as Rene was introducing himself, being from Unido, I was thinking, does digitization present other fears for developing countries? In particular, what I have in mind is, do you still need industrialization to become rich? Historically, most countries became rich through industrialization. But does digitization mean that we're now skipping the process? Is it possible now to go straight from an agrarian society to a digital society and skip industrialization? If not, does the fact that most developed countries have now moved on from being industrial economies to digital economies make it even harder for developing countries to catch up? A related point is, with the digital economy, it seems that scale economies and network effects mean that a lot of them operate on a global scale. Does that mean that for any firm in developing country to become competitive, they also need a global operation? Does that make it harder for these companies to establish themselves to begin with, to become meaningful competitors internationally? And if it does, then it means that probably economic development again becomes harder, because now a small developing country firm would need to basically catapult into a global competitor in a very short time in order to have any chance of staying in the market and competing with the tech giants. And needless to say, that is not a very easy proposition. So those are the fears I had when I think about digitization and the implications for digital economy from an economic development perspective. But from a competition regulation perspective, I also have a few comments. So first of all, it's been mentioned a few times, is the consumer welfare standard the appropriate standard for competition law enforcement? Setting aside Barack's comments that consumer welfare should not be the standard for competition law in general, it should be protecting competition. My question is more on, is there any reason why the consumer welfare standard should not be, or should be adapted, or should be changed, or is not appropriate for the digital economy? And to me, to answer that question, what we need to think about is, do consumers play fundamentally a different role in the digital economy as opposed to the offline economy? And if they do, then I guess there is a reason to think about maybe the consumer welfare standard needs to be changed. But if consumers ultimately are the ones who buy the products, they're the ones who consume the products, they're the ones who drive the demand side of the market, then I'm not sure if I see the reasons why the consumer welfare standard should be abandoned or at least adapted. A few other comments in relation to how the big tech firms should be regulated. One aspect of the importance of data in market power is the more a firm, here I have in mind Google, the more a firm, in more markets a firm operates, the firm can collect data about a user in many, many different aspects and in many more markets. And what that means is the firm's market power in any one market actually comes from its operations in multiple markets, and that may mean that for a competitor to be able to match, say, Google's data set on consumers, they may have to go into multiple markets at the same time, and that may present difficulties. And also, it brings to mind the conglomerate issues that at one point were of interest to the Europeans, but which we have since really moved away from. But here the situation is slightly different because in the EU context, especially the GE Honeywell merger, it was the firm using market power in one market to try to branch out, using tying, etc., to I guess project this market power into multiple markets. But here, actually, the market power in the aggregate comes from its operations in multiple markets. And I have two more quick points. So I think there's a tension. It was mentioned earlier. We should be reluctant to intervene in nascent markets because we need to let technologies develop and grow. But I think we're also very aware of the fact that these big technology markets tip, and once they tip, it's very difficult to turn the clock back. And so we don't want to intervene too early because we don't want to disrupt technological developments, but if we act too late, the market has tipped and it becomes too late. And so to me, in the ideal world, we want to be acting right at the correct time when the technology is no longer nascent, but before the market tips. But we all know that we can never do that in reality. So I think we just have to make a choice here. Do we on average try to act early, or do we on average try to act late with the accompanying costs and benefits of each course of action? And finally, Raju mentioned first-degree price discrimination and personalized pricing in particular, how big tech firms can have increasing ability to charge us our own personalized price. And Uber is used as an example. Apparently it can offer you different prices based on how much battery you have on your phone, where have you gone before, what even the make and brand of your phone, etc., etc. And in addition, obviously that presents a price discrimination issue, and there is a lot of literature and case law on these issues in both the US and the EU. But I just want to highlight, actually, that issue also may have implications on predatory pricing, because now a dominant firm can target its price decreases specifically to to consumers who are susceptible to competing offers, and what that means is the price cuts that has to be offered can now be a lot more targeted, and the dominant firm no longer needs to offer the price cut to the infra-marginal consumers, which reduces the cost of predation, which makes recruitment a lot easier. And it's possible that we will see predation more often with the ability to engage in personalized pricing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for also linking it back to industrialization. Is it still needed? That, of course, is for UNIDO a key issue. And I think that's, to a certain extent, India is already showing that services picked up much larger than in the industry. Manufacturing is still at a relatively low level compared to other countries in Asia. And that also the second point which you made is when do we interact, or when do we intervene? Too early, too late? What's the challenge? How can we do that? I think I would like to thank the discussants and the presenters for staying more or less on time, which gives us a time to discuss with the audience. So I would like to open the floor for questions. Brief questions, please.
Alan Asher from the Foundation for Effective Markets. A question to Jonathan. You mentioned quite rightly that 80% of economic activity is still in the old paradigm, not the new. But then your challenge was to find a way for the new technology leaders to discover ethics. My question is that can you think of a single example ever since Adam Smith warned us of the propensity of businesses to get together to conspire against the consumer? either in the online or offline world? And if you can't think of any, why would you be confident that we might be able to instill ethics in a new generation of leaders?
Wow. Okay.
You go ahead.
Okay.
Because the question was to you.
I wouldn't say I'm confident. I would say I'm praying and hoping. But I think we are seeing this, and it's a gradual wave. I mean, you look at. I always say, venture capital was a response to technology startups coming up. And I think what we're seeing now is, and I use this as an example. I went to business school. I won't give away my age. I learned how to make money. I went into private equity when I left university. Now I see a new wave now of social entrepreneurs, and this is a term that I'm sure many of you in the room will understand. If I was to say this 10 years ago, I don't think any of us would have understood it. And I think particularly with the millennial generation, there is this, I think there's definitely a sense from when I speak to these people on the ground that making money is not the be all and end all, that they want to do good as well. And in terms of government policy, how does this manifest itself concretely? Let me give you a few examples. I gave the example of the Social Enterprise Act in Thailand. Now this, again, I mentioned a social enterprise is a company that's raison d'etre is not profit maximization, maximizing shareholder wealth. There's an ingrained social mission that looks to trade and make money as well. I think we're seeing governments putting these sorts of incentives in place. So I think it's twofold. On the one side, you need the carrot and the stick, and we're seeing a lot of incentives put out there. Also, in terms of investing, you're seeing this term impact investing coming up, which is huge in India. So investors looking to make money but do good at the same time. And I think a lot of these things have not been government-led or anything like that. I think there's just this changing mindset that actually you can do good and do well, so to speak. But this is also manifesting itself in terms of government policy as well. So as I mentioned, it's more of a hope. I think we're certainly seeing things going in that direction. Of course, with the Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, there are many of them. There are 17, there are over 160 plus targets. What I think the Development Goals have done, though, is ingrain this issue, this three-dimensional issue of people, planet, and prosperity, or economy, environment, society, in all decision making. So when policymakers are thinking about this, I think they're thinking about these three dimensions in the business leaders as well. You're seeing things like B Corps growing. You're seeing this concept of moving beyond CSR and responsible business to these different areas. So I think there's hope there, but there are some very practical initiatives that have been put in place by both governments and by business as well.
I'd like to open up from Bharat. You want to do it?
Yeah, so I would like actually to follow up on I think that Jonathan's comment is one of the most important comments that were made here, and probably because he's an outsider. I do think it's extremely important, and I do, like him, I share with him the view that we see considerable change in corporate culture. I do a lot of corporate governance, and I regularly interact with executives in big companies, and the culture is very, very different. So they do think, while companies have not changed the view that profit is the essence, what today companies do understand and executives do understand is that in order to maximize profit, you have to factor the interest of other stakeholders. This is probably the most significant thing. The other thing that have dramatically evolved during the past few years, and the Me Too movement made considerable contribution, is we have much better understanding of what corporate culture is and what are the mechanisms of corporate culture are. This is something I cannot overstate the development in the past 4 or 5 years. Now, why is it so related, so important to competition policy? Violation of competition policy are generally profitable. So when you design internal mechanisms in a firm, it is very easy to have reward structures that benefit performance measured by profit, and that creates some pressures on lower level to violate competition policies or engage in other profitable violations, while the top executives are insulated from knowledge. And that's today understood, and companies address that. So there are many reasons to be concerned, but I think that we see positive movement, and I think that Jonathan's point was excellent in that sense.
correct me if I'm wrong, but our understanding is that when it comes to these high-tech firms, it is not about profits, it's not about profitability, it is about valuation. And when that becomes the objective, the entire incentive structure changes, the entire strategies of how you do business changes. And what we are looking at, and when we are looking at data, and especially even in the context of India, because we do a lot of combinations, we get a lot of notifications, huge amount of financial flows into the economy, investments into these sectors is happening. So which is to be appreciated. However, the competition in the, and so this is again, as we started, that the financial market competition will reflect into the product market competition. Those again were rules where, yes, profitability was the objective. Now in the financial market, it is the valuation is the objective. So when that is the case, we are seeing some kind of a disconnect between the competition in the financial markets and competition as understood in the product market.
I just have a quick comment to what both Jonathan and Barak said. I do agree with you that corporate practices have changed a lot for the better, especially with CSR and everything, but I just want to remind all of us that none of those changes took place as organic from within the organizations. They took place because of external pressure and influence, and that's what we're talking about here. Left to themselves, there is, and this goes back to what Alan said, left to themselves, there's always the incentive to profit out of collusion and all kinds of practices that we consider not so good. And so those impetuses happen from the outside. In most cases, the ball was set rolling from the outside, and companies simply had no option. We're talking about the Nikes, the Enrons, and the Cokes from the 90s, for example. So I would be a little skeptical. I'd still trust the free markets, but I would be a little skeptical that all these positive developments would happen from within. And about the ethics aspect, there is a lot of incentive to be non-ethical or unethical.
Okay, let me use the prerogative of being a chair and basically say also there's a very pragmatic approach to this, because I think with the online economy, the stakes of not doing well for everybody have become much higher. So if you do something which is unethical or considered unethical by some, you will be exposed immediately, and your risk and your valuation will come down. So I think that with the online economy, there's more access, but it also means that if you go playing for a profit motive, you are so exposed that firms are building in resilience strategies from that perspective.
Volkswagen, Cambridge Analytica.
Yes. And there will be many more, unfortunately.
That we don't know about.
That we don't know yet, isn't it? Okay, I want to open up for other questions. Yes.
Not question, but just so you know, the last year we had, for the very first time, the technical community of technology came up with 23 principles on AI, which is how we would develop AI in a, towards humanity's development and not the other way around. Facebook declared only 7 out of 23, so that tells you a whole lot.
Yeah.
So there are two things. One thing, Facebook is unique in the sense that the corporate... No, hold on. It's unique in the sense of this corporate governance is extremely distorted because you have one individual who controls the voting right. So everything that people say about the significance of external pressure is absolutely true, but it's also important to understand that if anything, Facebook illustrates how bad corporate governance can be really bad. So that, I think, is confirming with what you said. The other aspect which is related to is that when you advise corporate boards today, one of the things is that they lack what we call age diversity. So when we talk about diversity, we talk about gender or ethnicity, but one thing that big corporate do not have is age diversity. They do not have millennial yet. And the millennials, as a professor, I can say that they have many shortcomings, but they're thinking about social issues, and their commitment to civil rights and the social fabric is fundamentally different from prior generations. And as we see more and more millennials getting into boards, I think I'm more optimistic, but again, I do not discount anything about the significance of external pressures.
Okay, can open up for more questions.
of Dar, Numerous Consulting. It's an economic advisory. I have a question about the link between personalized pricing and predatory pricing. How first-degree price discrimination is going to facilitate predatory pricing. I just want a clarification, really. Didn't understand that. Because it's particularly topical here right now, so.
Right. So my point was, I guess I kind of threw it in the last minute, and after seeing the orange flag, actually I'd prepared a 20-minute presentation on this, originally thinking that I was presenting, then I was told I was a discussant, then I thought, okay, well, at least I'll throw in a comment in the end. So my point is, the very basic point is with with predatory pricing, the usual modus operandi is the dominant firm will have to cut prices across the board, because if in a market where you can only charge one price to consumers, if you want to charge a lower price, even only to a particular group of consumers who are particularly susceptible to competing offers, you will have to cut the price across the board. And so you will incur greater losses, and it is this loss that we need to look at to determine whether the dominant firm can recoup the losses. And the general theory is, or the general assumption is, if the dominant firm cannot recoup the loss, then it is not predatory pricing because it is not rational for the firm to do so. But what I said is that if firms can now target their price reduction against specific consumers, and to the extent they can distinguish between the infra-marginal consumers and the marginal consumers being the ones who are at risk of being lost to competitors or a new entrant, the cost of predation is much lower because you only need to enact a price cut to a much smaller group of consumers. And if that's the case, then the cost of predation is lower, recoupment is easier, predatory pricing may become more common, it may no longer be as rare as, for example, the US Supreme Court has said. There are other complicated issues as well, because at the moment with the predatory pricing doctrine, we do a price cost comparison, and we usually look at the market price and in a lot of cases, the average variable cost for the entire market-wide output. But with personalized pricing, where the price cut is only undertaken in a small part of the output level, these things have to change. You can no longer, I argue that you can no longer use the market-wide price, and also the cost base is different. But that is for the 20-minute presentation that maybe eventually I'll get to give. Thank you.
So, I understand. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Uday Mehta from CUTS International. So I had two questions, one to Payal Malik. When you look at the role of antitrust in the realm of big data, what are the challenges do you foresee and new threats to competition that competition authorities need to be aware of? So that's my first question. And just extending this discussion on responsible business behavior, just wanted the opinion from Jonathan and Raju Parakkal on should we be concerned about the political influence of some of these big tech giants and super platforms? Thank you.
Answering your first question, will have I think it's a 40-minute presentation, but still, big data and concerns of antitrust. Every authority differs. From what is emerging in India, I can just say that privacy is yet not crept into as an antitrust concern in India, even as an exploitative conduct. We tend to depend on other instrumentalities as and when they appear. So that's the point number one. Second, yes, data-driven acquisitions have now crept into the concerns of competition authorities all over the world and also in India. So the CLRC, that is the Competition Law Review Committee, having introduced size of transaction tests to assess mergers and acquisitions in the digital space, which are driven mainly by the data advantage and the reason to collect troves of data. Having said that, even if you do that, what can be done is always a big question, even if those acquisitions come for vetting, because sometimes the standard toolbox gives answers which are contrary to the intuition, and without naming transactions, the way they have been tailored, they have been tailored in order to hoodwink authorities, whereas they have been tailored to get the data advantage, but they have been tailored to show as if there is no AEC because they are advised by very good competition lawyers and economists. So these are the large areas. So data-driven acquisitions, I think, is a very, very important area in which competition authorities should be now delving into, collecting more empirical evidence. I'm not saying jump into it without any sense of what's happening. And so to that end, the Commission is looking at data-driven. And last, in the transaction platforms, the issue of platforms being an intermediary and not sharing data with onboarders of these platforms may also, going forward, become a concern.
Let me just make sure that, Uday, I got your question right. You said, should we be concerned about the political influence of these tech giants? Oh, definitely. As I showed with my example, that's definitely a concern. And also we have the case of Cambridge Analytica. And I think there has been, we put a brake on it a little bit because these cases became exposed. But from my perspective, I think as far as the injuries of what I call as democratic injuries of digital dominance, it is an ever-present elections that don't reflect the choices and desires of the electorate.
Quick answer is yes. Sorry, is this working? Yeah. Quick answer is yes. However, you could have replaced your question, tech platforms, with, if you look back in history, by print media, by major corporations, whatever it may be. It just happens that tech corporations are the... there we go. You could replace tech corporations with any number of things. I think it would be the same. I think certainly there are new risks with this, particularly things like deepfakes and this whole concept of fake news. These terms are coming up that were never used in previous industrial revolutions. But I think there's a question of balance here as well. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think what these tech platforms have done has also allowed people and citizens to mobilize at scale. You look at the Arab Spring as an example. You look at the climate movement which Greta has led on. This wouldn't have been possible without these tech platforms. So I think, yeah, and both those are political points. So I think we have to maintain balance. And with any new idea, new technology, there will always be the good and the bad side. You look at AI, there are many benefits in terms of cost-effective healthcare and education, all these sorts of things. But on the other side, it could be the new arms race. I think we'll always have that balance, but yeah.
Okay, we are getting close to the time, so I want to give those two gentlemen and then there. Can we get the mic?
So my question is more in the context of the responses. I mean, we heard about collusion or dominance, but just in terms of government and regulators also having different views when they think of, within a country, when they think of competition. I mean, for example, India does not really have a stated competition policy in place. Then we put it in the global context. We talked about companies being present in multiple jurisdictions and using that as a way of achieving further dominance. Now, clearly data is one nuance which is kind of different in the online economy, and land is maybe not the factor that it is in the traditional manufacturing. But getting regulators and governments globally to work in some kind of harmony and synergy as a response, if that doesn't happen, how do we really think realistically we can, if we agree to all the challenges, can it actually be tackled even if, let's say, few geographies get it right?
Okay, so we just take these three questions and then I ask in one round of responses.
Thank you. My name is Amol Kulkarni. I work for CUTS International. My question is also in the context of developing economies and linking the ethical and responsible business practices. As the panel has suggested that till now, whatever changes we have seen in responsible ethical business conduct have been forced by external factors, as pointed out by Raju as well. How do you see this happening, particularly in developing economies, for two reasons? Because regulatory and competition regimes are still very weak. And secondly, the awareness amongst consumers about potential risks and harms of data misuse and of online economy is still not up to mark. So maybe Cambridge Analytica did some damage in US, but nothing happened in countries like India. A separate problem is that developing economies are dealing with their own challenges, such as income generation opportunities, job creation, economic growth, etc. And these big tech companies are likely to contribute substantially to economic growth. So excessive regulation on these companies may disincentivize innovation. So how do we achieve that balance, particularly from the perspective of developing economies? Thank you.
David?
If we think about where the power is located in the system we're talking about, I've heard a lot of people around the world wonder about the potential effects of having most of the big data companies located in the United States. I wonder what impact, we have very little time and it may be difficult, but if we're talking about the fears that are supposed to be, being discussed in the first panel, this is certainly a fear a lot of people have. And I just wonder if anybody has any comments on it.
Yes.
So we cannot answer all questions, but let me just be brief. I think that the major concern is, one of the ways in which my thinking of competition law has profoundly evolved over the years was the role of competition policy, the relationship between competition policy and the political structure of an economy. And as I understand it today, at least, or my thinking is that competition is a feature of capitalist democracies. And companies in capitalist democracies can succeed only when you have democracy, and competition policy is relevant only relevant. And for that reason, the big companies have concern to address some of the concern about democracy, because they do not have viability without democracy, and they do understand that. So I think that one of the defining components that we have is concern about democracies, for at least in countries where there are democracies. I think that what you said is absolutely correct, that we should have concern about the concentration, and in the US especially, because the big companies, the big data platforms can use developing economies to experiment with preference shaping, and we do not have the answers. It's something that we should be concerned, we should think about harder.
Let me pick up on your questions. Sorry, I keep breaking this microphone. I'll just shout. On this issue of responsible and ethical business practice and these issues, I think this is all context specific, and let me give you an example. I also cover the Pacific, and you go to a Pacific island with 2,000 people, and they're praying that Alibaba is coming to set up a payment system there, because the rural women who are producing these garments can be part of the value chain. It's a completely different conversation to the one we're having today. There's no fears. It's please come here and please help. In terms of responsible business as well, again, in a country like that, of course, the climate change will hit the Pacific the earliest. So intuitively, the people who think with the business are thinking about the environment all the time, because it's so in your face. You know the waves will get higher and stronger. And in these circumstances, I don't think it's so much, there's no external forces, it's the people themselves and the business leaders thinking, we're going to need to think about the environment in our business if this island is to survive. So I think both those points is very context specific. On this issue of power and data, it's an interesting one. And I think in this space it's so new. I don't think there's a best practice policy response in many ways, but certainly you look in the EU at the moment, I think a month ago, Angela Merkel came out saying, well, look, we're trying to advocate for governments to start housing their data in Europe and setting up a new thing around that. A couple of months ago, I was in Vietnam, where the government have just outrightly said, if you're an internet company who wants to operate in Vietnam, your data is housed locally. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but you're seeing these quite extreme policy responses, and absolutely, I think politics and power infiltration into the data agenda all the time. And it's interesting to see how that will evolve. But I think there'll be a move away from the US. That is for certain.
Final comment.
Yes, just 10 seconds to David's question. Great question. My concern is actually kind of related to that in terms of the data we actually use to run our studies, and especially for developing countries. If all the data we use for running our studies are from Europe and the United States, and we're using the results of those studies to enact policies in countries like India, we have a problem there, because you're using the insights from a different set of population for designing policies for an entirely, not entirely, but kind of different set of population on the other side. So to me, the location is a problem, but I think it's also what kind of data are we using here in terms of studies. There's some history with the medical research on this, but I think we're seeing it in these studies also.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to come to a wrap-up of this session. First of all, I would like to thank the presenters and the discussants for their valuable comments, and also for the audience for engaging in the questions. I think a few points which I picked up is probably the area of responsibility, or the ethics aspect of how do we drive this, what technology is, how technology is being deployed. I think the policy responses, we discussed competition policy, consumer policy, and also I think the issues that you highlighted, that the old challenges of the old traditional economy, the non-online economy, are still to be addressed. And I would add that, of course, we have also changes happening globally. We talk about climate change, but the access to information, the kind of changes that are happening that we need to accommodate. We had some exchange on the industrialization, which of course I pick up, and I very much like that Jonathan at the end also mentioned what I would otherwise have highlighted, is that we often encounter that we say, let's embrace the digital economy, because we can cut out the middleman from a small-scale producer perspective, in terms of the middleman taking a cut in the price, but also doing the selection of what can go to the markets, and that there is an opportunity for developing country producers to actually showcase their products and services on a global platforms. If they then set up to succeed on that, there is a capability gap on doing that. But with that, I would like to once more thank you all.